Happy Hump Day.
Tracy, hello, how are you?
I'm awesome. I'm very awesome. Thank you.
Great. I think maybe you also say hello to our listeners out there.
Oh, yeah, hello. Hello, listeners. Thank you for listening.
So how's your week been, Tracy?
What's been going on? Oh, I'm really excited to be invited to write some articles for a magazine. I'm specifically going to write articles around leadership, but inclusive leadership. You know, diversity and inclusivity measures and how to lead in that environment. So, you know, how to lead.
Which platform are we talking?
The magazine. It's called Brains Magazine.
Oh, that sounds right up my street.
And to be fair, I hadn't heard of them.
No, neither have I. Yeah,
But
a neuroscientist and so forth.
Yeah, but when I looked at them, when I looked at some of the writers and the writing, it's really, really excellent. And I like their model. I mean, basically how they work is they've got, you know, VIP writers, like Oprah's wrote, I don't know if they interviewed her or she wrote an article, but like, you know, the guy from Valley, Marissa Peer is like the famous hypnotist or hypnotherapist. So there's got some big names in that magazine.
And what's the subject matter?
Well, it's an array. So they have categories like mindfulness, lifestyle. I'll be focused on the leadership category, well-being, you know, those kind of.
That's fantastic.
Health.
Great.
Yeah, so it's good. So it's a really good opportunity to raise my profile in that space.
But it's also contributing to this area that you're very passionate about. Which is
exactly. Well, that's the point.
You're living your purpose.
Living my purpose, baby. Yeah. So there's that. So I'm excited about that. And then there's loads of things happening in the month of April.
There is.
What's been happening?
Yeah, it's been good. There's been a bit of a buzz around Sydney because the Obamas have been in town for a few days. So I don't know if you saw that, but yeah, Barack Obama is holding a speaking event. He held a speaking event a few nights ago. So for one night only.
Oh, I missed it. Gutted.
Yeah, but there was a little bit of controversy over it. I think, obviously not intentional, but I think as part of a program, I think there was at the start of the Sydney day, there was a welcome to country part organised. And I think at the last moment it was cancelled by the organisers. And so there was a bit of a backlash around that. And
that's a big deal. No welcome to country at a massive event, especially from a previous world leader. That's in Australia. That's huge.
Yeah, I think previously was the person who was also facilitating this had also done this with the Dalai Lama,
right,
and another dignitaries who visited Australia. And it was set in a program. It was all part of a program. But I think the controversy was the person. I should mention her name.
Yeah.
Aunty Joy, maybe?
Oh, Aunty Joy. Yeah, I love that name.
I could be wrong. I just want to get it correct. Yes, that's right. Yes. So the elder, her name is Aunty Joy.
Aunty Joy Murphy.
Yes. And Aunty Joy Murphy was always scheduled to be part of the program, to actually commence a program with Welcome to Country. And the ceremony includes handing over a gum leaf to the guest. And apparently Aunty Joy, before the ceremony or before the program, she asked to have somebody accompany her because she's in her 70s, and also to ask if she was able to present a gift to Obama, which was the gum leaf. And the organisers categorised this as being too difficult, quote, too difficult. And so that was the reason why they thought to remove this from the program. And I think it's probably worthwhile highlighting it was the organisers and not Barack Obama. So yeah, and then it was all resolved because I'm pretty sure Barack Obama probably heard about this. And then the next thing we know is that Aunty Joy has been invited to attend the VIP luncheon for the next day and have conducted there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds really interesting. I didn't get to see Mr. Obama, but
I know. I'd love to meet him.
Yeah, I know, probably a good thing. I probably would have like thrown some roses at him or something. So
It's better than throwing your knickers at him.
no, I would reduce my dignity to that. Besides, what would Michelle say?
That's true. I just love Barack Obama. I just think he's like, I mean, obviously I have him on a pedestal and I'm sure he's not perfect, but I just have him as this humble, smart, kind, generous advocate for
I have to disagree.
human rights.
I have to disagree because what you just said there, Tracy, Obama is perfect. He looks good. He sounds good. Probably smells good. Well, he is perfection in my eyes. He's a
next stalker right here.
He's perfect. I mean, all those attributes, that's a great human being right there.
Yeah. Great human being. Yeah, and so I would love to have met him. I'd love to meet him and talk to him. And I'd love a selfie and I'd like to shake his hand. And I want to just have a conversation.
I would have wanted a little peck.
Oh, you want a peck on the cheek?
Yeah, no, selfie. Selfie I can live without. Just give me a little peck.
Peck. So you remember that?
And I wouldn't wash my cheek. You see, now I understand, how all these millennials are all after like Harry Styles, that kind of thing. I think for maybe it's our generation, it's Obama, it's Barack, isn't it? Mm. So maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I can. So yeah, you're right. It's the closest thing I've come to understanding the hysteria around celebrity or musicians or movie actors, because I like movie actors and I like songs and artists, but I've never felt like, oh, I really want to meet them.
But that's it, you see. So it's the Barack effect.
The Barack effect. Okay, well, that was interesting. I mean, I love to have gone. I heard that the VIP lunch was like something for business leaders was something like $1,700 a ticket for the lunch.
That was actually the speaking event.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because last year I did try to get some tickets, obviously. But yeah, that's like to spend like just shy of $2,000 on a speaking event. So yeah, unfortunately my Baraka budget couldn't stretch that far.
Mine, nor could mine at this point. One day.
It will happen.
It will happen. All right. Thanks for that.
That was the buzz that was around town with Sydney. So what other buzz was happening in the world?
All right. So, well, talking of the White House, as you know, former US President Barack Obama obviously was his home. We have a story from the White House. I picked this story because I love to celebrate the achievements of people of color. It's part of what we're doing here. And this woman is amazing. Actually, I'm talking about the writer, actor, and comedian who's just been honored with a National Medal of Arts alongside other artists, including Bruce Springsteen and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So Mindy Kaling is who I'm talking about.
Is this the comedian who basically did the Mindy Project?
The Mindy Project, yes.
Well, that's a lot of our listeners. And
yeah, I'd say that's the first time I've seen her. So Mindy Kaling shares rare glimpse of daughter Catherine during White House visit was the title in the Independent, UK publication, the Independent. And it's interesting. So she's got this amazing achievement. It's kind of focusing on her personal life, but let's just see what it says. It's focused on the fact that there's a photo of her daughter. So Mindy Kaling posted a rare photograph of her daughter on social media. So that's why. To mark her receiving the National Medal of Arts from US President Joe Biden. The Mindy Project star was honored alongside other authors, singers, and artists at the White House in March. So it happened on the 21st of March. So this has happened. She's 43, same age. Same age. Kaling, 43, shared a series of photographs from the day, including one of her holding 5-year-old Catherine's hand as they walked up a set of stairs in the iconic building. She's an actor, screenwriter, and producer, wore a fitted purple dress for the occasion, while her daughter, whose face was turned away from the camera, wore a white tall dress with a ruffled skirt and sparkly silver shoes.
I like that style.
I like her style. Other photos included the Instagram post where one Kaling standing next to Biden after accepting her medal, and a selfie of her with singer Gladys Knight and actor Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who also received honors And then there were other public figures who received medals, like designer Vera Wang, authors Amy Tan, Anne Patchett, and Tara Westover, and Bruce Springsteen. So that's amazing that she's won that. What I like about this is how, I'm assuming somebody wrote this for Biden. Maybe it's a wrong assumption. Maybe he wrote it himself. But, you know, he has to write something, has to kind of do a little bit of a bio about this person and their achievements as he's presenting this award. Yesterday, I went with my family to receive the medal at the White House. To hear the president speak about my parents, their journey to the US, my late mother's dreams for me, and the power of comedy to make people understand each other was almost too much to take in. It didn't feel real. And she expressed her heartfelt gratitude and promised to spend the rest of her life earning this medal because I don't feel like I've earned it yet.
That's humility.
I call that imposter syndrome right there. How has she not earned that?
Maybe it's because she thinks that there's still so much more to do.
Yeah, but does it mean she hasn't earned it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think there's not just Mindy, but a lot of maybe individuals who earn these medals, who are celebrated, where their success has been celebrated. Yes, they appreciate it, but they also focus more so on, okay, what does a journey look like now? What is yet to come?
I call that a growth mindset. I've always felt, what's next? What else can I do? How else can I contribute? But that's not the same as having already contributed so much and not feeling deserving that you've earned this award. What do you think that comes from?
I mean, when I read that, I basically thought of humility. I thought, wow, you know, she's very humble about her achievements. But I think with an individual, if they show humility, that doesn't mean that they're lacking self-appreciation. And that's what humility is that you can self-appreciate without being over, I suppose, without ego coming in.
Yeah, I get that.
And I thought what Mindy said there was a great reflection of that. And so, and also I think what I also see, you know, from as a brown person, and Mindy's also brown, is that also it's amazing to see how far comedy has come, entertainment has come, especially for Indian females and females of Indian backgrounds. And you know what Mindy's done is groundbreaking, because there's not a lot of Indian comedians on the comedy circuit anyway. And then
female ones.
So Mindy comes along, not only is she of Indian background, but she's also female, and she's a young female, and she's really kind of she's broken that glass ceiling. And so that's what I see this award as.
Breaking glass ceilings, that's what we love, isn't it? But you're right, also, it's all of those things, not disagreeing with you, but apparently these are her words, that she doesn't feel like she's earned it. And that's like, it's kind of, well, I interpret that as diminishing what she's accomplished and what she's contributed. Because what you just said, she's smashed the glass ceiling. She's like one of very few Indian people on the circuit, never mind the fact that she's probably one of very few women. And to have achieved this success and speak to people, the only way she's that successful is because she speaks to people through comedy.
Yeah, but a lot of you often find this with speeches, and even whether or not people are in the public eye or not, people who have achieved a lot, have made a difference to other people's lives, especially, they don't seem to recognize it, because that's not what they're about. That's not what they're looking for. It's like they just love doing what they do. And maybe that's what's happening here with in response to your question, Tracy, about, you know, where do you maybe that's what it is. Mindy is probably, and again, I'm just putting it out there, you know, Mindy obviously loves comedy. She loves laughter. She loves making people smile. And she's just doing that. That's what she's just doing. And so to be then given a medal about it, she's probably never looked at it in that way. And maybe that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. And then she goes on to say, I wish my mum could have been there. Nothing is perfect. Maybe her mum's no longer with us, hey? And then there's a Twitter, I'm going to have to follow her on Twitter now. She's put a Twitter thing on there, which I'm not going to read. And then it goes on to talk about her personal life, like her children. She's a single parent. She keeps her identities private mostly and only occasionally posts photos. and that she's kept the paternity of her children private.
I didn't really know about her personal life so much. I mean, I don't really follow Mindy, but I suppose the article also shows how, I suppose, under the radar she's been, and she doesn't necessarily seek the limelight, as it were. And you're talking about underplaying achievements. That's something I didn't know about Mindy and her career background was that there's a show on Netflix called Never Have I Ever,
which I love.
So this show, and Tracy, you'll probably know, you may know more about it, but I didn't actually look at that show first of all, even though it appeared in my Netflix Rolodex. I didn't really give it the time of day because I didn't think to choose to watch the show initially on Netflix because the trailer seemed very targeted at teens. But it was my friend who's actually a comedian, very successful comedian in the Asia Pac circuit. He actually recommended it to me, and he said, "You got to give it a go." And so I did, and I absolutely loved it. And I think one of the reasons why I loved it was because the format of the show was that the main character, the antagonist, is a teenage girl of Indian background. And it tells the story of how she's navigating her life in American culture and with that dual culture of an Indian background but a Western upbringing, which obviously resonated with me. But it had that comedy spin on it, which was fantastic. And so I ended up binge watching it. And then when I told my friend about it again, he actually told me, he said, "Oh, I'm not sure if you know, but it was Mindy who wrote that." And a lot of people know that, but it was actually Mindy's a writer of that series.
I didn't know that. And I've watched it all religiously. As soon as the next one came out, I was like, I've got to watch it. I loved that show. I thought it was awesome. I had no idea she wrote that. And actually, it just reminded me, because you kind of talk about the story of how, I don't know how she came up through the ranks, but she's in a movie where she plays a woman, an Indian woman that's funny, that wants to write comedy. And I wish I remembered the name of the movie. I totally forgot about it. But she's one of the main characters, but the other main characters is
Emma Thompson.
Emma Thompson.
Yes. I've seen the trailer again. Yes.
Anyway, I can't remember the name of the movie, but that's actually a really good movie.
That's the thing. She's actually broken into Hollywood. So again, I don't know Mindy's backstory, and maybe it's worthwhile having a peek there. And but it's basically it sounds as though she's come up from comedy. Maybe she's played the comedy circuit for a while. And I don't know what came first, the script writing or the call to Hollywood. But she did do a Mindy Project, which is a TV series. So maybe she did the comedy circuit, and then it went into a TV series, which often happens, and then they go into Hollywood. It's a bit like Everybody Loves Raymond. Mirror. He was in the comedy circuit, then he got signed up for a TV series, and then whether or not maybe he obviously didn't transfer over to Hollywood as well as we might have liked, but Mindy's done that again, the glass ceiling effect.
Yeah, just amazing.
Yeah, really good, Val. Yeah, on that point about Netflix, and
we talk a lot about Netflix.
People of Indian background. So the third series of Indian Matchmaker is going to be dropping in April. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I've not even seen the first. I feel like I need to watch it.
Not seen the first. It was literally a worldwide success, the first series. There was actually reunions, and there was different chat shows being basically talked about. This Indian Matchmaker series 1. And it basically focused on, the whole series is all about a matchmaker called Seema. And she's from Delhi in India, or Bombay. So it's Seema from Bombay, and Seema from India. And she basically is a matchmaker, not just for families and individuals in India, but she actually goes over to the States, which is a real hook piece, because you get to see that Indian background, mentality, and ideology of marriage and their theory on matchmaking being implemented in a Western culture with people of Indian origin. So I think that's the beauty of the show. You're getting to see how a theory or a method of matchmaking works in Western culture, which is fantastic. And so she uses India and America. But series 3, which is dropping in April, is going to be, she's actually taken a plane ride and she's landed in London. And so now she's going to be matchmaking. She's going to be taking her matchmaking skills to a London market. And I can't wait to see how that plays out.
All right. Well, there you go. Plug for the show. There you go. And what story do you have for me today?
The story that I've chosen for today is a story about a story.
Story about a story. Ooh.
Story about a story. So as you probably know, I'm a big fan of books. So I'm probably the only person that still has an active library card. And the story that I've chosen is from 9 News publication. And it basically shares that the headline is Roald Dahl's publishers should be ashamed for changing language. And what the story is about how the Roald Dahl stories are now being changed, altered to basically make them more acceptable to modern readers. I didn't know what this was calling out. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the article so we can see. So the 9 News Network article reads, Book Prize-winning author Salman Rushdie said the publisher of Roald Dahl's iconic books should be ashamed for changing colourful language in many of the author's most famous works to supposedly make them more acceptable to modern readers. A review of new editions of Dahl's books, such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda, shows some passages relating to weight, mental health, gender, and race have been altered. So that's what it's basically talking about. It's basically saying that what's happened is that the publishers of Roald Dahl's books have revisited our classics like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda and looked at where they can basically be more acceptable and maybe more inclusive. And so what they've said, the article goes on to say, Augustus Gloop, Charlie's glutinous antagonist in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was originally published in 1964, is no longer, quote, enormously fat, just, quote, enormous. So they've obviously taken the fat out of the enormous fat. Some characters are now gender neutral, such as Oompa Loompas in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, who were previously described as small men, but are now small people. In the pages of James and the Giant Peach, the Cloud Men, who are ancient, threatening giant humanoids who live up in the Earth's atmosphere, are now presented to readers as cloud people. And while in Matilda, the description of Mrs. Trunchbull's great horsey face has been changed to just face. So I don't know whether or not, I don't know how this has come about. And Salman Rushdie's called it out as obviously a fellow author. And I have to be inclined to err on the side of Salman Rushdie because I don't know if this has gone too far. I'm questioning if this has gone too far because taking away these, I suppose, making these small amendments in the written form, in the original form, will it take away the impact of the story? I don't know if it makes a difference so much. I don't know if it does.
That's a really good one. Listening to the story, reading the story. I mean, I'm kind of in 2 minds, but I'm more leaning towards Salman Rushdie myself. I think the problem is, there's probably misogynistic, racist, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there probably is all that stuff in there, but it's a reflection of the time. And there's still a messaging, there's still a higher purpose and a higher messaging to those stories that are valuable for people. Right. Yeah. And it's the word of that author. That's what he wrote. That's the time he lived in. And he created these fictional characters. I think personally, the only place where I would be okay with you changing those things, like what you described, would be if they were put in movie form and then they're based on.
Yes, that's right. Like, for example, Disney has obviously made adaptations, or not even adaptations, but Disney's basically put a different perspective on the way Cinderella or Snow White looks, for example. Whereas with Roald Dahl, it's the written word. And I mean, I don't know if Roald Dahl will be turning in his grave at all of this, because it is what Roald Dahl's writing, you know, it's so magical. And it is about the fact that, like you said, Tracy, it's that underlying message, about, like, for example, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the fact that, it was Charlie who came from such a simple background, so leading such a simple life. He didn't have very much. And it was his values that Willy Wonka saw throughout the journey of the chocolate factory that made Willy Wonka then give the factory over to Charlie, because it was the values, and values are not made of material possessions. It's made of character, and which he gained from his grandfather, chose to accompany him on the golden ticket. That was the message. And so going as far as looking at Oompa Loompas, like, to be honest with you, I have lived with, I've been brought up on Roald Dahl stories, and that's the reason why I'm still a book lover. It's one of the reasons I love books is because of Roald Dahl. It really is. And I love his work. And never have I questioned what gender the Oompa Loompas are.
No.
That's never been a factor of mine. And so to hear about now Oompa Loompas now being questioned in terms of gender and being altered, it's just it's almost bastardizing his work. And
I know. I just think you could.
It's such a shame.
You shouldn't be able to change somebody's work and call it the same thing. I think if you want to write, if people want to write books now, children's books, and they have those elements, that's fine. That's what you're writing now. This is the times we're living in now. But I don't think you can change history, because at the end of the day, that's what still exists to an extent. Those things exist and reflected in the books, and that's just.
Yeah, and also I think and there is a difference between words and vision, clearly, but in terms of, like, for example, the Augustus Gloop example, where enormously fat, now the word fat has been taken out. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of Roald Dahl. The reason why I was always attracted to Roald Dahl's work, even as a child and as an adult, is because he was so animated. His descriptions were literally out of this world. They were so animated, they were over animated. And I love over animated work, especially in a written form. And, and so therefore that's why enormously fat, it's over animated. That's what the intention is. And so that's why I just think if you take away and if you change that element, you're basically playing around with Roald Dahl's original magic potion, magic ingredient. And so I think maybe it's a step too far here.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I can see, I'm wondering, like, I'm maybe being cynical here, but I am being cynical. Their motivation, because obviously Roald Dahl doesn't live, and they must own the rights to his work to be able to change it. I guess what could happen, what they're afraid of happening, is his material becomes kind of redundant, or maybe not redundant, but less popular, because lots of literature, even popular literature, will have, like, even Cinderella, that's a terrible story, really. If you take how she needs a prince to save her because she's a victim kind of idea, right?
In other words, it's like, oh, my mum would love Cinderella, because Cinderella's all about, okay, you only have a life and a purpose of life if you have a ring from a finger of a very rich man.
Right. So can you see then how that story has another side, whereas the story itself with the mice and the pumpkin and the midnight, and it's all very lovely and wow for kids, but the deeper story, the message. So I can understand why there's going to be elements of that in literature with kids' stories, and how you might think, well, I don't want my kids to read that, or that's not a good representation. I don't want my child to take away that message. So I get it. So that could be what's happening with the Roald Dahl, but then that just means that the readers don't read them anymore, and new stories come in. And if their messaging is more empowering, then that's what people read and take away. I still don't think you have a right to change what's already written.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame, because there's not enough children reading these days anyway, especially with the rise of digital technology. And there's not enough eyeballs on paper anyway. And so it'd be a shame.
Yeah, I think so. But you're right. The way he writes, his style of writing makes the entertaining factor, right?
Exactly, it's over animated. In the article, it says, while in Matilda, the description of Mrs. Trunchbull's great horsey face has been changed to just face. I'm thinking, when I read that, I thought great horsey face. I was like, so if they've taken horsey out, so now we're also considering horses? Is this what we've got?
I don't think it's to do with horses. I think it's more to do with making women look ugly and horrible and like animals. I think it's more about
the whole point was about the teacher. It's showing character. It's vilifying
it's personifying and vilifying through description.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of Roald Dahl's books was that they were over animated and to get a point across, and it was blown out of proportion. That was why they were so funny. I mean, take the Twits. It's one of the greatest books of all time. That was completely blown out of proportion. We don't have marriage organizations, getting on a bandwagon saying, oh, you know what, we must alter the way that the Twits were presented. So we don't, it's a step too far.
Yeah, I think we both agree on that. As much as we advocate for inclusion and diversity and empowering messages, they were written in a time and they still have value. And I think more important is if more kids did read, or maybe as they're older, to really be able to see the different dynamics that come out of that story. What are the empowering messages, and maybe what could be the perception of discriminations that it's propagating. It's just a discussion. As long as you can be critical and see that.
Yeah,
I don't see that.
And in terms of adaptation to make it more acceptable in the modern world, as they're saying in this article, rather than looking at things like Oompa and great horsey face, maybe focus on, in terms of adapting, if they're going to adapt things, then, have a look at, I don't know, let's say Violet, what's her name?
I remember in the Charlie and Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, her name's Violet, and she plays, and the character is a very spoiled child, and she's asking for aid for all these different toys. So she could basically, maybe it's a case of referring to her on her phone, or asking for this Instagram.
Or they make it relevant to modern day.
Relevant to modern day, yeah. But again, because that's
we would still be changing it.
That's an adaptation. I think the conclusion to this is, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Yeah. Well, I just think if you want to send different messages, you have to write new things. I don't think you can change somebody's original work. I think the only person that has the right to change that work is Roald Dahl himself. And he's not here to do that. So you just have to leave it alone. It was written in a time, and it reflects the time it was written in. Can't alter history as much as you'd like to.
Yeah, leave a man alone. Respect the Dahl.
Respect the Dahl. Oh, funny. All right.
Have we got time for what would you do?
Yeah, let's do a quick what would you do. All right, let's see. So here's your what would you do. So this is work scenario. In a meeting, a client only looks at and speaks to the men on your team. What would you?
That's an unusual one, but probably a common one that comes up. I know, if I now think about it, I know in scenarios that has happened to me. Now, previous jobs where I've been required to work with people in global locations, I have found in previous jobs, actually in a previous job, I was looking after a portfolio which was for the India-Asia market. And I remember one of the first, I remember in that role, in the calls that I did find that I had to prove myself in the first few calls to gain trust, and then the work would then progress. But I don't know where, I don't have anything to compare it with. Like, for example, if there was another male on the call with me, because it was only myself, and I felt that was maybe a bit of a challenge, where because I was owning and managing and leading that particular portfolio single-handedly, and I was the only representative, when I was speaking with my global counterparts in India and the Asia markets who were female, there was a different approach compared to when a male counterpart of theirs would come on the call and they would ask me questions around my background. which wasn't relating to a task at hand.
Mm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah, but then again, it's maybe there could be another perspective here. Let's say you're in a board meeting and you're not there's no eye contact, for example, and there's eye contact, or they're talking to the other male counterparts in the room. It could be that the speaker might feel uncomfortable speaking to women. It could be a cultural thing. It could be the fact that they may not have had experience with women in the room before. So maybe holding space for that consideration could be a factor.
Okay, so why it matters. It says this slight might seem trivial, but it sends a signal about who matters. In this case, the men. It can also create a dynamic where women miss out on valuable chances to join the conversation and shape outcomes. When this happens, your team isn't able to put the best foot forward. And it says what to do. So this is obviously a suggestion. Do your part to make eye contact with everyone and try to find ways to bring more women into the conversation. When possible, you can pass the baton to a woman in a way that highlights her expertise. So Bhavna would be great to answer this. She's actually our resident expert on the topic, for example. So this is just a practical way to manage it. Whether it's a culture, like you're right, it could be in their culture, women aren't senior leaders. They're more like secretaries. And actually, I've worked in an environment where I've worked in Japan. I went to work in Japan specifically, and I noticed that all the women had roles of secretary, and there was no women in the positions whereas in Australia, the women were in higher positions, obviously, because I was a woman in high position, but not in Japan. Every senior leader, every manager, every skilled role was a man, and the only women in the room were secretaries.
And how long ago?
This was in 2018. Yeah. So that's in my industry. It was very interesting. But anyway.
Years ago in the pharmaceutical industry.
In Japan. Yeah.
In Japan. This was 5 years ago.
Mm.
And were you based in office which is in the middle of a city, or was it?
No, I was based in Sydney, but I'm Asia Pac. I've been an Asia Pac manager for a long time.
In Japan, was this in the city you saw? Isn't that interesting?
Well, I can tell you the dynamics of Asia Pac is very interesting, and it really influences how you operate and how you work. And you need to understand these things, but it doesn't mean you just accept them and ignore them, because then you will, because then it's hard to be innovative and creative and have everybody's voices heard. You hire people for their value, and if you're going to be ignored just because you're a woman, then your value is not being taken in. But anyway.
Yeah, I think if I was in a book, I think I've been in boardroom meetings, but I don't necessarily look at. I've been in boardroom meetings, and even if somebody isn't speaking directly at me or giving me or I find that my counterparts, my team colleagues, are being spoken to over myself, that wouldn't stop me. That hasn't stopped me from contributing to the task at hand, to the subject matter at hand, in order to do my job. So that isn't a factor. Whether or not someone looks at me when they're talking to me has never put me off putting forward my contribution to my role in my career in the workplace.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. So what to do, which I already just mentioned, and why it happens. And it says this may happen because of performance bias. Your client may assume consciously or unconsciously. Now, I have to emphasize, some of this can be unconscious, which means they're not consciously, intentionally doing it. Yeah. It's only when you start to think this plays out a lot that you might start to notice. You talked earlier about the purple car. Once you start talking about purple cars, you see them everywhere. And that's kind of the point of this podcast. We're really highlighting here, trying to highlight unconscious bias and the way it plays out. And then you'll notice it more. And then hopefully we can give you some practical suggestions on how to manage it. Okay. That's resourceful. And when I say resourceful, it's not blaming, it's not shaming, it's not accusing. It's resourceful because It's managing it so that you bring some awareness to it whilst making the most of the situation, as in making it empowering for everyone. That's what I mean when I say resourceful. So why it happens, this may happen because of performance bias. Your client may assume consciously or unconsciously that the women at the meeting are less competent and lower in status than the men. And if your client is a man, this behavior could also be the result of affinity bias, where people often gravitate towards others like them. So there's a potential unconscious bias rooted in performance bias and affinity bias there.
I think I'm in that what would you do scenario. I think I'd probably be, I'd go the other way, in the sense that if somebody isn't necessary, if I feel that the speaker is giving vocal attention to my male counterparts compared to me, it would motivate me to contribute even more to the conversation at hand, to basically to get them to look at me. So in this, what would you do? I think for me personally, it would probably be an instigator of, yes, I'm going to be vocal in this meeting.
Yeah. And it's interesting about status, because something else I noticed, because I worked in Asia Pac with, managers, senior leaders. And I also noticed in some, I'm going to say which ones, but in some countries in Asia, women, if I would consider that society, women have a lower status, like it's known, it's a generalization. In that culture, in that society, we have a lower status. And then we have women that are in senior leader positions in that culture. I tend to find they don't speak at the table, even though they're in the position to speak, they don't speak.
It's a really interesting what would you do question, because it can go either way, in the sense that I can understand that not being looked at whilst being spoken to, that can feel quite intimidating and, sorry, not intimidating, but actually inhibiting, what I was looking for. It can be inhibiting to a female in the room, and it may not necessarily encourage this person, the female, to speak up and contribute. Whereas other personalities, it would be seen as an instigator or motivator to be heard and really heard. And so it can go either way. I can see it from both perspectives. It can be seen as an inhibitor completely. I can understand that. My personal experience is that it's been seen as an elevator or as a motivator. So,
I get that. Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. There's two things that can happen though. Depending on how strong that bias is, you could be constantly talked over and cut off. Right, which is really bad. That can happen as well, no matter how motivated you are. And then also at the same time, think about that. Your behavior is to be heard, be seen. And you're really trying to get your voice heard and say what you need to say to contribute. So that essentially is an effort that the men don't have to make, right, in the room. And also, you have to be careful. Because, well, you have to be careful in the sense that then how you could be perceived as being pushy or aggressive, because your behavior is striving to be heard. So that, can you see how it gets complex?
How it could potentially play out. That's right.
Yeah,
it's tricky to navigate. But when you are, if you're not in that situation, if you are basically then speaking up, even though you haven't been given that eye contact, then that is what you also have to be prepared for, and all have to be mindful of, is how I've got a contribution to make to this group in the workplace. How am I going to navigate it so I'm not coming across as overly aggressive, as rude, as, all these things that I wouldn't necessarily have to think about.
And exactly. So imagine you sat there, you're thinking, how can I say, I've got this really great idea, contribution, how can I say this without being aggressive, without blah blah blah, being respectful, not sounding defensive? Imagine all this and actually just simply trying to make a point. It's a minefield. But there's just one thing I really, really want to emphasize with the whole purpose of having this conversation is it shouldn't be all on the individual. And the idea here is to raise awareness for everyone so that people can be allies and support when they see this happening and offer support. So when this is, what do? It's, you see this happening to someone else, it's not happening to you. Yeah. What can you do? Well, then you can take action. You can change your behavior. You can bring in that person on purpose intentionally. And I think you told me about this before in your own personal experience, where you talked about women who weren't seeing you for whatever reason, or the group of team of women weren't seeing you, weren't hearing you, were dismissing your input. And when they brought a man in who noticed this, he became an ally for you and would bring you in and would comment on your idea. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about what everyone can do, not just what the individual themselves.
Yeah, and I liked what you said, Tracy, earlier about if there is a boardroom meeting and a person then pipes up and says that, oh, so and so introduces the person, a female who's not being into the conversation, saying, oh, so and so has input on this or has proven experience on this. What's your input on this? So it's about being able to rely on your co-members, your team members, to be able to also recognize that you have something to input into the conversation and bringing you into the conversation.
Yeah, recognize that, but also recognize that you're being excluded here. You've got to see that happening. They've got to see that work playing out. If you don't see it, it won't occur to you.
And that's where the unconscious bias is.
Exactly. So that was a good one.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. And as usual, absolute pleasure talking to you, co-host. Thank you.
Good. That's all good. That was great. Great story time.
Great story time. I wonder what's going to happen between now and then.
No, I know. And listeners do, post all your comments, keep them coming in, and we'll look forward to chatting next week.
Yeah. See you then. Bye.